So good evening, everyone. I am Taj McCoy, and I'm so glad to welcome you all here tonight for another session of our Admissions Deans Roundtable. As promised, we're continuing to convene these roundtable discussions. So as we move forward, you may see a new face or two. We have one such new face here tonight with us. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. I am a seven-stage admissions consultant, a former law school admissions dean and director, a former career services director, and an author. With respect to admissions, I most recently served as the director of admissions and scholarship programs at Berkeley Law. My pronouns are she, her. I am extremely excited to welcome my colleagues as panelists representing law schools across the country today to discuss the close of the 2022-2023 application cycle, as well as the United States Supreme Court decision on affirmative action within the admissions process. As you all can imagine, there's a lot to unpack and consider in terms of the SCOTUS decision. So much like our dean friends are currently experiencing here, which you will hear more about tonight, there will be several sessions to suss things out because new information will develop over time. Welcome, deans. In the interest of time, friends, I'm going to call on you one at a time, and if you could, please share your current school, title, the number of years you've worked in admissions. I'd really appreciate it, and I will start with Dean McShay.
Thank you. Sean McShay. I'm with Boston College Law School, and I'm the Assistant Dean of Graduate Enrollment Management, which incorporates admissions, financial aid, recruitment, and retention. I've been in the industry for over 21 years.
And Dean Smith.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dexter Smith. I am the Assistant Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Emory University School of Law, and I have been this is my 18th cycle.
Dean Mack.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bianca Mack. I'm the Associate Dean for Equity, Admissions, and Student Affairs at the University of North Carolina School of Law in Chapel Hill. And this is my 16th year in law school admissions. I'm still a newcomer. Hey, y'all.
Dean Simmons.
Hi, everyone. Tracy Simmons, Associate Dean for Admissions and Student Affairs at Howard University School of Law. And I believe I'm going into my I think this is my 24th year. So yeah, long time.
And Dean Butts.
Hi, my name is Shawnee Butts. I am the Assistant Dean for Admissions, Financial Aid, and Diversity Officer at Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. I am going into my 21st admissions cycle.
Wonderful. We're so glad that you joined us this time around, and we'll hope to see your face more often. So as we've done with all of our previous conversations, let's set the scene a little bit. We're now at the end of July. School starts next month, and the next admission cycle for 2023-2024 is traditionally one that opens on or around September 1 for most schools. Some vary. Before we jump into today's subject, can you please provide us with a picture of where law schools are in the cycle? Dean Mack.
All righty. So it depends. If you follow Spivey on Twitter, there are still some schools that are admitting from their wait list. So it definitely is still a fluid process. I think I'm an institution that's right on target and right where we want to be. So I don't expect that we are going to be making any additional offers. So it just depends. But that the message yesterday was hopeful. And it was like, hey, if you're the first one admitted or the last, you're still going to walk in the doors for orientation. So, reach out to schools and make sure they know that you are still interested in case there's going to be any movement. If you know, all right, this is where I'm going. I've signed a lease. I'm moving in. I'm making plans. Let other institutions know, hey, I know I'm hanging out on your wait list, but I'm not going to be able to accept an offer. And reach out to us. If you haven't heard from a school and you reach out, we'll probably tell you where we fall on that spectrum of still making offers, considering it. No, I think we're done. So it'll be August next week, y'all. So we're getting close to orientation and start of classes. So schools should have some type of firmer idea of where they are in their process. And many of us are going to be willing to share that with you if you reach out.
Are you seeing a lot of waitlist movement so far, Dean Smith?
We are not tapping our wait list. We've been oversubscribed for some time. So we are not moving, but I was agreeing that, it depends. Some schools are, some schools aren't. We're just late July, essentially early August, classes are ready to begin. And, agreeing with, hey, if you are on a wait list and you know that you are committed, firmly committed to an institution, let us know. My nods were in agreement with everything that Dean Mack was saying.
For candidates who currently are on the wait list, if they've submitted a letter of continued interest sometime during the spring, should they submit another one now as a final effort? Dean McShay.
Sure, why not? I mean, the spring was months ago, and you never know where a school, is. I mean, at this time of the cycle, it could get vulnerable. I certainly agree with my colleagues that we have a sense of where our classes will land. But that's not to say that someone higher up the pecking order won't go to their wait list, and that could change any one of our scenarios, right? So, I think being on the top of people's minds is an important thing to do. I think students should use, again, their best professional judgment as they approach that process. And if you do plan to visit schools as was recommended a little bit earlier, take the time to plan the visit, contact someone to let them know. On my campus during the summer, we don't have summer classes, so we typically do a lot of construction and renovations and things. And so it's not the same as just popping in. Yes, we'll work with you, we'll help you see the facilities, but planning helps us to kind of coordinate that a lot better. This is also one of the first summers in a very, very long time that my staff has been able to take like a consistent vacation. I just returned from vacation, right? And so staffing is a little bit different right now because we're all trying to use up that vacation time before, classes kick back in and we're back on the recruitment trail. So yeah, send that additional letter recommendation, show us that you are still interested in our programs, and do the work necessary so that you're conveying things that are truthful, factual, that you've worked out a logistical plan. If you really want to be somewhere, it's your top choice and you don't need scholarship and, all of these things, feel free to tell us all of that information because it can help us get to the right decision. But don't say things that you don't mean. Don't say, I don't need scholarship, and then get an offer and say, I need scholarship, because, we're at a place where it just might not be possible, right? And prior to like previous beliefs that it's not a 1-for-1. So if someone withdraws and goes to another institution and they posted somewhere that they had a $20,000 scholarship, that doesn't necessarily make it available for you. It's not a 1-to-1 kind of trade-off in that way. So just be mindful of that. Speak your truth and we'll make the best decision knowing your truth. So
thank you for that. Now, kind of switching gears, obviously it's end of cycle. And so some of you may have questions with respect to end of cycle. I do have some questions about end of cycle that have to do specifically with the SCOTUS decision, but if you have some, please drop those in the chat for me. But first, let's go ahead and provide a framework regarding the larger part of our discussion for tonight, just for some background to ensure that we're all on the same page regarding the decision we're discussing and its potential implications for law school admissions processes. So here's a brief overview. 2 separate lawsuits, one against Harvard, one against the University of North Carolina, were brought in lower courts by Students for Fair Admissions to challenge the admissions processes at these institutions, which expressly factored race into admissions considerations. The Supreme Court granted cert to hear the case against Harvard after bench trials, and then also added on the NC case eventually. For each of these cases, according to the majority opinion by Chief Justice Roberts, the court considered the admissions processes and ultimately applied limitations to race-based admissions programs set forth in Grutter. In finding that Harvard and UNC both violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, essentially Justice Roberts went on to say a benefit to a student who overcame racial discrimination, for example, must be tied to that student's courage and determination, or a benefit to a student whose heritage or culture motivated him or her to assume a leadership role or attain a particular goal, must be tied to that student's unique ability to contribute to the university. In other words, the student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race. This decision was issued the morning of June 29th. What was happening behind the scenes once the offices on your campus began to receive the news? Where were different departments meeting that same day? Who on campus has to be involved in these conversations? This is for Dean Butt.
So I will say that many law school admissions offices and law schools in general were prepared for the ruling to land the way that it has. Actually, we've been preparing for at least 18 months. We have the benefit of, well, I don't know if it's benefit or misfortune for them, of having colleagues who are living and working in states where race-blind admissions practices were already taking place. So we've been doing workshops and having meetings and strategizing with our colleagues from from law schools in those states where they operate with race-blind admissions to get prepared for this. We've also been telling schools and offices to meet with your general counsel to figure out what the ruling would mean to each institution, because it's going to mean something different for every school. And what I mean by that is that your general counsel can interpret it one way at one school and then see it a different way at another school. Both could have very great reasoning and justifications as to why they see the ruling the way that they do, and therefore the policies are going to be crafted as such. So not every law school is going to have exactly the same policy, but they will be complying with the law. So that's, I guess, one thing. And I know that prospective students are probably extremely concerned about what this means. Does that mean that there's an end to diversity in law school? And the answer is no. The Supreme Court did not outlaw diversity in law schools, and schools will still have an opportunity to create diverse classes. The way in which they do that, though, is just going to change. And so, again, this is going to give us as law school admissions professionals an opportunity to begin together to get creative on how we can be in compliance with the law, but still build a diverse class.
So before we delve further into how the decision affects next cycle, let's talk about the one currently coming to a close. Are there any effects on the current cycle? Is there anything that waitlisted students should consider submitting? Dean Simmons?
My general understanding is that nothing should change for this particular cycle. My understanding is that most of my colleagues have been instructed to kind of keep business as usual. And that, as kind of Dean Butts pointed out, and as you alluded to, the plan is to kind of be thinking about 2024, really. I think Dean McShay's advice about continued letters of interest and things of that nature for waitlisted candidates at this point is pretty much all you can do. And as Dean Mack pointed out, I mean, we're literally, in some instances, days away from orientation, pre-programming, and things of that nature. And so there's not a lot that may change or happen in that time frame, but the reality is that most of us are sticking to business as usual for now. And once we kind of hear from our general counsel, work with our admissions committee, hear from the Law School Admission Council, Department of Education, AALS, ABA, et cetera, then we'll probably have some more information to kind of make some decisions about how we move forward. But for now, stay the course and kind of keep doing what you're doing, but also, as everyone pointed out, stay in touch with the admissions offices of the schools that you're either planning to attend and or waitlisted at.
So I guess the next question then would be, how are changes to applications being determined, and will the timing of application releases be affected? Dean Mack?
Several of us have mentioned general counsel. So I think what's probably happening is that units around campuses, so undergraduate admissions, Dean Butts really laid out that many of us in admissions have been anticipating this decision for at least a year to a year and a half. So we've been thinking about what this ruling could mean and what we might have to do to adjust. So I think a lot of us are drafting different prompts, or we are editing the prompts that we currently have to comply with what the ruling demands. my institution is very risk averse since we were a named defendant in the case. Counsel is not telling us what we need to ask or what we can and cannot ask, but before our application is released and goes live, they will have to bless what we are going to ask. So our personal statement section might look a little different than it's looked for prior years. So what I did was I took down what was on the website, just as an FYI and FAQ, that a prospective applicant who didn't want to access the application itself, but just wanted an idea of the prompts, took that down. Our application doesn't open typically until October 1st. So we're one of those schools that's a little bit later in the process. So we do have more time. I would suspect that a school that typically opens on August 15th or August 31st or September 1st may need a little more time. But some schools might have been prepared and already have questions drafted that they're in the process of getting approved. So this is one of those, it depends. You should reach out to individual institutions if you'd like some specific guidance on where they stand with their essay prompts.
Dean McShay?
Thank you. I'd like to chime in. I think it's important for us to be mindful that law schools generally exercise a holistic evaluation as they're navigating applications. So there will be, I don't think for many of the applicants that there will be as many changes to the process as just generally speaking. There might be some individual things that specific schools might require, but through a holistic approach, I don't believe any of our colleagues would have been making a decision based upon race or having race as a main factor why you get a decision or not, right? At the root of the evaluation is a determination that you can do the work. And if you can't do the work, doesn't matter what your identity is, there's no proof that you can do the work, right? So our decisions are based on a holistic evaluation of all the skills, all the attributes, all the experiences that you bring to the table. And that's always been at the paramount of the law school admissions process. Yeah, maybe on my side, I will not be able to see what someone's identity is as it relates to race when I'm evaluating an application. But that's never been where my eyes have focused in an application anyway, right? It's what are your experiences? What is the narrative that's pulling it together? What is the evidence that you can do the work and that you have a track record of doing the work? What do other people think of you as you've identified them to support your application? So again, I don't think that it will be as heavy of a lift on the applicant side, because law schools also want to be mindful of that. We don't want to create a whole range of additional barriers for people to get into the program. Now, again, there might be some specific prompts that speaks to the values and the missions of individual institutions that they might want you to speak to that could make the picture clearer for them. But I don't think there's going to be a drastic overhaul of the process. And so I don't want students to walk away from this like, oh my gosh, what do I do? What am I going to do next cycle? How am I going to navigate all of these new challenges and these new things for me to think about? We're thinking about those things and we're trying to navigate them and create applications that are still cohesive and that will help you tell the whole story. You got to follow the prompts. You got to do what people are asking you to do. And I think that's going to be the hardest part of it, just being mindful of what the individual schools are asking, because they may be asking you something that is really directly tied into their mission, and you need to speak to that thing that they're asking you to speak to. You can't apply a one, essay for every school in the instance that people might be, that applications might be saying something specific that speaks to their community. So again, I'm hoping that I can turn down the alarm a little bit in thinking that you have to do all of this weight and carry these things all on your own, because I don't think that's the process.
Right. And that is what we're here to illuminate tonight. Thank you so much, Dean McShay. In terms of kind of starting to speak to the ways that candidates actually can address the prompts. In terms of diversity statements, there's been talk that these statements are likely to change in some way for many schools that don't necessarily already have a specific prompt. In what ways might we see this kind of adjust in terms of being more mission focused? And I think, Dean, but you actually worked on this recently. Would you like to speak on that?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we've been discussing, and I've been to several workshops and discussions about this, is if you're instructing students to kind of tie everything to the mission of the school, the characters, attributes, values that you have, that's one of the things that we believe will help schools who are more risk averse be able to lawfully consider those things. There was some wiggle room in the ruling that said, again, we can consider how someone's race affects their different life experiences. And it would behoove students who are interested in sharing how their race has affected their life experiences to tie them specifically to a law school's mission, to the university's mission. So when you're being admitted, they can clearly draw the connection between what you've shared about your life experience and our stated mission and our values. So it's easy to see why the decision was made to admit you as a student. Again, I want to remind everybody, a lot of schools will still have a goal of creating the most diverse and talented class that they can. So again, it is okay to share that. And the best way to share that would be to, again, tie personal traits or attributes or values to the school's mission.
Thank you for that. We do have a question from the audience specific to diversity statements. Are the new form of these statements going to become more important in the admissions process after the SCOTUS decision? Welcome, Dean Krim. Would you like to take that one?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I apologize for my delay. My name is Maya Krim, Assistant Dean for JD Admission and Scholarships at Loyola Chicago School of Law. And the diversity statement is a good question. That's one we've been discussing internally lately. So we always accepted diversity statements. And then about 3 years ago, we decided to add a specific optional essay to our application to encourage applicants to submit a diversity statement. And it's very broad. We encourage applicants to share any information about their background, socioeconomic status, anything that they would consider that would contribute to the diversity of our law school. So we've not finalized anything yet, but we still will accept a statement of that kind. What we're going to call it, we're not quite sure yet, but in terms of it becoming more important, I think yes, or any opportunity, any optional essays that a school may have that will allow applicants to share some information beyond that will be available to the reviewer during the application evaluation process.
Now, you mentioned optional statements. I'm just going to piggyback on that one. We've heard that some schools may change their personal statement. Some schools are considering, changing their diversity statements. Can we anticipate that some schools may change or add other optional statements or add interview components? Dean Smith?
I think everything is on the table now. Sometimes the interview process can be kind of resource and time intensive. However, you can glean a lot out of those opportunities. The statements, whether it's a diversity statement or some type of optional addenda that allows you to tell your story and how your life experiences may have led you up to this point. Those are definitely an option. There may be other components that we haven't even really touched on that may be added into the application process. So as you all are looking forward to this upcoming cycle, I would keep an open mind, but I would also look at it from the opportunity that it's not necessarily an added component or more for you to do. this is an opportunity for you to shine and really get your story out, to those who are making these decisions. So absolutely, just kind of think that there may be different components, but they are purposeful, and ultimately at the end of the day, they're to your benefit.
So we have an audience question. In Michigan, the number of Black and non-white people enrolled in law school decreased drastically after the ban on affirmative action, and they have not gone back to those pre-ban numbers. How will brainstorming with those schools realistically help? Dean McShay?
Sure. Well, I mean, that is true. We expect that there might be some decrease in diversity because we have seen that play out all across the country in instances where new programs have been or different admissions processes have been implemented. But it is helpful to hear from those institutions because they've navigated this space, right? They can tell us who have not navigated through this space, what are some things to be mindful of? Maybe we can do some, advocacy in our local governments and our local states to help us navigate these things a little bit differently. I'm in Massachusetts, which is generally a fairly liberal place. That doesn't mean that there are not, elements here that are counter, what the normal narrative is for our state, which is being a liberal and a progressive place. So I certainly think that talking to our colleagues helped. I mean, the first webinar where I heard from schools from California, North Carolina, Texas, and some other places, it was just really helpful to be mindful of all the things that we need to be thinking about. And because of that, we've been thinking about it. We've been planning. We've been navigating the process so that whenever and whatever the decision, whatever the outcome would be of that decision, that we really be prepared to navigate that in the best possible way. Without that information, we could have been caught in headlights trying to figure out what the next steps are. But it's because those schools and those colleagues of ours shared their experiences, the process is not going to be that way, right? It's still going to be smooth for you. We're going to navigate the questions that we need to navigate now that we have more details about what the actual outcome, what it actually is. But we were just kind of preparing for the unknown before that. And having that expertise from those institutions has been just tremendous in shaping us and helping us guide and navigate through this. So I'm actually quite thankful that they were able to share their experiences and really shed some light on the things that we need to be thinking about.
Can I also just add one quick thing?
Sure.
There are several of our colleagues in California, for example, that are also have had affirmative action ban that have been able to since then increase diversity in their classes. Another professional school, but there's a professional school in California that's about to enroll their most diverse class even before their anti-affirmative action legislation took place. So those are the individuals that we're also talking to see what is successful in different ways that we can increase the applicant pool and expand our reach in order to create a diverse class.
Thank you. Dean Mack, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, and I think this is a great thing to piggyback onto what Dean Butts just said. From a lot of those conversations, what I learned from our colleagues was that applicant behavior had something to do with that. The pool shrunk. So applicants heard there's an affirmative action ban in the state. They didn't apply to those schools at the same rates that they applied in prior years. So over the last 2-3 years, LSAC has reported to us that the pool of underrepresented minority applicants has been larger than it's ever been before. So institutions all over the country are enrolling their largest diverse classes ever. This is happening all over. That is applicant driven. Because Dean McShay already stressed that no one is getting admitted just based on their race. The only reason why we have been able to enroll those larger classes is because there's more very competitive prepared applicants in our pools that we are able to offer admission. So as long as applicants are still showing up in the same way that they have been showing up prior to this decision, you position us the best to be able to really lead and work towards our mission to enroll the classes that we want to enroll. But I think that was really a point that underscored that for me, because yeah, you hear, oh yeah, one particular school said 83%, decline in Black student enrollment, but that was directly correlated to the shrink in the pool as well, the applicants who admitted or who applied to them. So I think that that's really important to think about, right? There is a little more of a burden on applicants to convey more and different information to us. We're going to figure out how we need to adjust so that we can still enroll the classes that we want to enroll, but you have to apply. You have to set us up for success, or else we are going to see those declines.
Dean Mack, someone asked in the chat, just kind of in response to what you've been saying just now, are you saying that you expect fewer underrepresented folks to apply in this next cycle?
I hope not. I think before, right, if one state is banning something, then you've got 49 other states where you can apply, there were 9 states, I think, that had affirmative action bans or something like that. So there were 41 other states where there were law schools and you could apply there. Now that we all have to make this adjustment, I'm hoping that, that growth that we've been seeing over the last 3 years in the pool of underrepresented minority applicants is going to continue to grow at the same rate. And if that happens, why would we expect a decline? I don't think any of us knows what to expect, but I think if applicants are doing everything they can to distinguish themselves, convey what we need them to convey, as Dean McShay said, read the prompts carefully. Give institutions what they have asked for. That is the best thing that you can do to position us to be able to seriously consider you for an offer of admission. So I don't have expectations. I think it's going to be different for everyone. It's gonna be a different experience, but I think all of us who've been doing this for so many years, we could say that about various points in the years that we have been doing admissions. So there isn't we don't have a crystal ball to know, but as long as applicants are applying in the same ways and the same rates that they were applying over the last 3 years, I don't expect there to be drastic decreases.
I've had 2 people in the chat ask specifically whether this means that more schools will create or implement pipeline programming to recruit underrepresented folks for their classes. And so the question is, do you see creative or targeted recruiting as a responsibility law schools must take on? And also, is recruiting considered a part of the admissions process? Dean Simmons?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's, kind of on the table and up for discussion. I think that part of our challenge right now is that, different opinions about the case itself. A training that I was at this week, actually with Dean Buds, one of the attorneys who's worked on some of these cases basically cautioned everyone about overcorrecting and kind of going directly to what Dean McShay was talking about in terms of overreacting. And so the reality is that we need to think about what our recruitment process looks like. We need to think about where we recruit, how we recruit, what tools we use, what resources we use, and things of that nature. But I think we need to use everything in our toolkit to ensure that we have, diverse classes, because that's what the firms want. That's what the government agencies that are hiring want. And that's what the clients want. They want people that represent them from their different communities and their different backgrounds and religions and, veteran status and ability status, et cetera. And so I think that on the recruitment piece, it may look a little different, but again, it's so early that I think that, we're still getting our traditional recruitment information kind of flowing in at this time of year. And I've not heard of any schools saying they're going to cut their recruitment. I think that the targeted recruitment that some of us may have been interested in the past, for example, if we specifically are recruiting at Jesuit institutions, or, or we're specifically recruiting at historically Black colleges or historically Chicano colleges, like those are things that we may have to be thinking about, but those institutions are going to exist. And so are we saying that we can't go there? I don't think that's what we're saying. And so I think that I saw someone put in the other chat, like, does this mean we're going to be more intentional? And I think that's absolutely what it means. What that intentionality looks like and how it plays out will differ from school to school, because again, all of this is tied to your budget, to your mission, most importantly, and what your ultimate goals are. And so I think lastly, it depends on your state and how closely your legislature and other folks are kind of in the mix as it relates to higher education specifically. So good question. But I think, again, it's early for most of us. And I think at this point in time, most of us don't plan on doing anything different, except that we will, where possible, plan events like this to ensure that there's a lot of information sharing about the fact that we are trying to still diversify our classes as much as possible, and that there's space for all of you, and that we want you to be as thoughtful as possible as you pull together your applications to ensure that you're conveying through your resume to through the personal statement, through your letters of recommendation, through your resume, all the different types of diversity that you bring to the table. And there's so many ways that you can do that. It just may take a little bit more work. And my last point for now would be that I want to speak directly to what Dean McShay said about the cookie cutter approach. Like, you're not ready to apply to law school if you're going to apply to 10, 15 schools, 10 to 20 schools, if you want to use the same exact essay for every school, same exact resume for every single school. That's just not going to work, not in this environment, not when everyone else is going to take the time and attention to really kind of parse out what they're doing for each school, to pay close attention to their mission and their focus and their programs and things like that.
I have a question here that's actually kind of interesting. Given the anticipation that the diversity statement may change to adjust to talk about the mission values and perhaps lessons or experiences and how those play into a candidate's perspective and perhaps motivations, do any of you plan to increase the page limit of this new statement? Dean Smith?
I mean, as I kind of said earlier, it's definitely an option. As we are reviewing the application and the changes that we will be instituting, it has become a consideration. But then you get into the ask, okay, when is enough enough? How many points, how much do we add? How much do we not add? Just so there are a lot of different questions and possible outcomes that come into making those choices. But the thing is, all of those things are being discussed. Not only are we talking about the structure, the questions and the structuring of the questions, we're talking about the mechanics of what that looks like as well.
But I add something here to hear. So in my experience, I have never been at a school where a diversity statement was a required component of the application. And I see a lot of my colleagues kind of shaking their head in agreement with that. So one, bear in mind that this is an optional statement. And there's a lot of different ways to incorporate your identity or your experiences or the results of your experiences as a function of your identity. There's a lot of ways to incorporate that in a variety of places in your application, through your involvement in communities and on campus and through different student organizations, through some of the, your hobbies and your work interests and the things that you care about and or write about, or maybe you're a blogger and you have this unique, there's so many different ways to incorporate characteristics and attributes that are a function of who you are throughout your entire application. I'm bringing this up because I don't want you to think, oh, I'm going to do this personal statement that speaks to something completely different and it doesn't bring my experiences into play, and then you're going to lay it all in a diversity statement. Remember, a diversity statement in most instances is is not required, which means if you add one, then great, it should add to the overall narrative that you're providing to your application. But if you don't add one, does that mean that you completely get rid of those extra strengths and things that you were going to speak to in that diversity statement? No, you infuse them throughout your application. So as you are navigating this process, bear in mind that one, the personal statement is absolutely required at every single institution. And there are some schools who don't have optional statements as a part of their application. And I say optional statements because, yeah, maybe it's a diversity statement, maybe it's an adversity statement, maybe they're asking you a very specific prompt that they want you to speak to. So if that is the instance, again, you've got to get out of this box that, oh, I can only do things in this one way. If race or diversity is a part of your identity, it should be a part of your identity. It can be a part of everything within your application. It should just be infused in all of those things, not just reserved for one statement where you throw it all on us and you just dump it all there and it doesn't connect to the rest of the narrative.
I feel like there are a lot of questions about like, well, what if I don't actually have diversity, or what if I'm not thought of as traditionally diverse, or things like that. And I just want to kind of encourage people to not think of it that way. All of you have something that you bring to the table that will enhance the experience of your classmates and your professors, but ultimately the legal profession. And so it may not be race, but it could be your religion, it could be your identity, it could be your ability status, et cetera. And so I think, don't think of it kind of like that deficit model, kind of think of it as, what do I bring to the discussion, to the law school, to the campus, that might enhance the experience of my classmates? And then the last thing would be that I feel like, we didn't touch on first gen status much, but for example, for our Asian American candidates, I know we often get this question because of some of these cases. And the thought is that, people need to be thoughtful about the fact that the Asian American group is not monolith, right? Like if you are a first generation Japanese student versus a fifth generation Japanese student, your experience might be different. But similarly, if you're a first generation Vietnamese student versus someone whose family has been here for 6 generations, your experience is different. And so don't discount that in terms of how you outline that in your essays. And I think that, Dean McShay's point about whether the school offers all these different types of optional essays, whatever we might call additional essays, things of that nature. It's going to be important for all of you as candidates to ask the question of each law school and to pay very, very close attention to how you can communicate who you are and what your background is. And again, don't get focused on the fact that it just has to be through the statements. It can be through your resume, because you can show what organizations you support or are involved with or belong to, what fraternities, sororities, organizations of that nature that you belong to or participate in, your activities, your volunteer work, et cetera. And so don't forget, there are other ways in which you can communicate who you are and what your values are outside of just your statement. And so I guess I would say just don't fret. Like, I feel like it's one of those things where people feel like they're at some disadvantage because they don't show up and they don't look maybe different, or they don't look diverse. And that's just not what we're looking for. The last thing I'll say for now is that, I think part of the other issue that we didn't touch on in the beginning was that for a lot of us, when the ruling came out, we were insulted because the presumption was that somehow or the other we pick up a file and I see that someone is Native Hawaiian and it's like, oh yeah, I'm just going to admit this person. That has never been what we do. If you cannot write, if you have horrible character and fitness issues, and you have a horrible attitude, you're still not going to be admitted, irrespective of your race, religion, background, status, et cetera. And so I think that part of the challenge for us is that, again, as all my colleagues have pointed out, we've always done holistic review. We will continue to do holistic review. We just want to make sure that we're putting you in a position to make sure that you feel comfortable, that you put your best foot forward in terms of conveying who you are and what you bring to the table, because that's who we want you to show up as in our classroom. We're not just looking at your LSAT score and GPA. All these other things actually do matter. And so it's important that you be thoughtful about that. Ms. McCoy, back to you.
Thank you. I have a question that appears to be asked in response to something that Dean McShay happened to say, but I'm going to pose it to you, Dean Butt. If we are infusing our background into our personal statements, is it then overkill to include the diversity statement or whatever it turns into.
So if you're gonna write about your background and motivations in race in your personal statement, you don't want to then turn around and do the same thing and submit a diversity statement. We have a lot of reading to do already. So I think the best advice I could give is if you are reading a prompt and it moves you to write about something other than your race and your background, then use that for your personal statement. Then if you would like to, you could submit a diversity statement that again goes into how your race has affected your personal life experiences. And again, I can't stress this enough. You want to always tie those characteristics and those qualities into the school's mission. That's, again, somebody asked, how can I make it my statement stand out? Tie it to the school's mission. That's how you can tailor it for the individual school. That's how you can make yourself stand out. Because if the committee is reading that and we know what's important to us and what we value, and you're mirroring that in the statement, then naturally, if we, all things considered, you're admissible, we're going to say, yes, that person is admissible for us because they truly believe in our mission, and that's going to be of value to our community. You also want to make sure that your diversity statement doesn't say the exact same thing that your personal statement says.
I have someone who's asking specifically about that resume. In terms of tailoring it, is it necessary to try to tailor a resume to specific schools based on their missions? And as a non-traditional student, how should they incorporate other things like hobbies, interests, etc.? Dean Mack?
There might be a school that wants to see the resume tied in. For me personally, I would like to see your resume align with what you're telling me in your personal statement and what you have on your transcript, right? So you're telling us, this is who I am, this is what I'm passionate about, this is what I'm good at. Hopefully your resume is going to have experiences that complement everything that you've told us about who you are. So I like to see some synergies between everything else you're telling us about who you are and what you do, what you've done, and then what's on your resume. If that neatly ties into a school's mission and you're saying, this is why I'm a great fit for this institution for these specific reasons, that's great. But I think, those experiences, what's really important on your resume is we want to know, what have you done? What skills could be transferable that have helped you prepare for the rigors of legal education and for entering the profession? So that's what we're looking for on that resume. So I don't know that your resume and your experiences have to necessarily tie into a school's mission, but if everything does line up really well and it's all complementary, I think that's one other reason why you as an individual might be a particularly good fit for one institution over another. And that is how we make these decisions. It's not ever just based on any one or two factors. When we say holistic, that's what we're talking about when we're saying holistic. How much do things flow and complement each other, and what really kind of adds up cumulatively to make you stand out. So that, I think all of that has to tie in together.
Thank you for that. And I think this is going to be our last question. And this is from one of our audience members. If we're trying to infuse our values and qualities and connect them to the school's mission, should we try to do this explicitly, or should this be more indirect, where we're introducing our own values and qualities that are consistent with the school's mission and values without saying it overtly? Dean Krim?
That is a good question, right? And I think that's one of those that I think will depend on the school, right? So like my school, Jesuit school, right? Social justice, right? Very, right? Specific values, and each school will have specific values in their mission statement. But I think you should be authentic, right? And so if your own values speak to the values of that school, then definitely tie those together. But if your personal values, are maybe a little bit different, it's okay, I think, to say that and be clear about that, right? I'm just thinking about recent panels with incoming students that I've been on where they kind of talks about why they're, relocating because their personal values, may not be aligned with those in their state or their family. And so it, in some ways it may tie in again with specifically with the mission of the school, but in other ways it may be, this is why I want to go to law school because I want to change some things, right? And so I think just being authentic is the most important thing. And also just want to speak to, in terms of adding additional things to the application and questions that we're asking, we are not trying to create any barriers or make the process any more difficult. And so I think that is one of the concerns that I'm kind of hearing from the audience, can I have more pages? Can I, right? And so we don't want to make it more challenging than it is. If anything is added, it's in an effort to try to help you through the process.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much to my panelists for tonight. This has been a really, really helpful conversation. And as always, I think we really appreciate that you all have been, so giving of your time and also, just helping to illuminate the process because it can be really confusing and overwhelming for our clients and our applicants. And so we thank you again for being here tonight. To our audience, thank you for being here. This recording will be posted to our podcast once it's edited for sound quality. And so you can anticipate that we will post a notice so that you all know when that goes up. But in the meantime, stay tuned because I will be sure to post once we have our next roundtable talk scheduled. Okay, and with that, good evening.